My name is Yasmin, and life with my husband has always been a delicate balancing act between duty and personal sacrifice. He often goes on official tours to foreign countries, tours that usually last for 4 to 6 months. These trips, in some strange way, always seem to revolve around me. You see, whenever a tour opportunity comes up, my husband has to get approval from his boss, and that's where I come in. For years, this strange ritual has played out. My husband would tell me about the tour, which would often involve high-ranking officials. He'd mention that the boss had approved a trip to a remote location, perhaps for 6 months, and I would know it was time to step in. The process was always the same. I'd have to meet with influential figures, often powerful ministers, to ensure that the trip was confirmed. My presence was crucial. Somehow, my very being would seal the deal. In the beginning, it had been for a couple of years, but as my husband's career advanced, the tours grew longer and the stakes grew higher. Soon, these tours were happening every few months, lasting for a long time, often accompanied by a substantial amount of money. At first, I tried to refuse. I didn't want to participate in this transactional world of politics and power. But each time, a subtle pressure from the ministers would convince me otherwise. They'd assure me that it was simply the way things were done, and I, unwilling to resist, would find myself in these uncomfortable, secretive meetings, often in luxurious hotels or official government guest houses. In 2022, everything changed. My husband was selected for a prestigious assignment to Tajikistan, a trip that would define the next chapter of his career. The minister's office was buzzing with excitement, and as always, my role was crucial in securing the approval. The news came as a surprise, but was also expected. The trip was to happen in September 2022, and I quickly prepared for it. Our flight to Tajikistan was nothing special, but when we landed, the atmosphere was different. The moment we stepped off the plane, we were met by the office driver and protocol officer. I couldn't help but notice the cold, businesslike efficiency in their every movement. Everything was arranged perfectly. No surprises, no deviations from the script. We were driven to a government flat, which was already stocked with everything we could possibly need, except for our clothes and personal items. Our first evening in Tajikistan seemed normal, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. My husband had arranged a meeting with Zafar and his wife, an old acquaintance from Qatar, who was also stationed in Tajikistan. Their flat was just across from ours, and we often met over tea. Zafar's wife greeted us warmly, but there was something about the way she looked at me that felt almost too knowing, as though she was aware of something I wasn't. The conversation flowed, but beneath the pleasantries, I could feel tension building. Zafar arrived shortly after, and the reunion was filled with laughter and shared memories of our time in Pakistan. But then, the conversation took a darker turn. Zafar mentioned, almost casually, that the real work was yet to begin. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something I didn't. It was all too cryptic. I pressed him about it, but he just smiled and changed the subject, telling us about the dinner we would be attending later that night. That evening, we arrived at the hotel, where the dinner was set to take place. The room was filled with influential people. Some I recognized, others I didn't. But the atmosphere was strange, almost suffocating. People exchanged pleasantries, but there was an undercurrent of competition. In those moments, I couldn't help but feel like a pawn in a much larger game. Everyone was sizing each other up, trying to figure out where they stood.
The dinner passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Zafar's wife and I spoke in hushed tones, discussing our experiences in Tajikistan. We both felt something was off, but neither of us could pinpoint it. I caught glimpses of people's glances, sharp, calculating looks that seemed to linger just a bit too long. The next few days blurred together. Zafar's wife and I went on shopping excursions, picking out things for our husbands. The days felt monotonous, Yet every conversation held an edge of hidden meaning. The routine continued, but the sense of foreboding remained. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was the minister, and he asked to meet us privately. My husband seemed excited, but I could sense the underlying tension in his voice. "It's all part of the plan," he said, trying to reassure me. That evening, we met with the minister in his private suite at the hotel. As we entered, I noticed how the room was arranged, luxurious but sterile. The minister's demeanor was different too. His smile was cold, almost rehearsed. He welcomed us and immediately complimented my appearance. But there was something off about it. It felt too calculated. After exchanging pleasantries, the conversation turned to business. The minister didn't waste any time. "You've done well," he said to my husband, his voice dripping with insincerity. "But there's always more to be done." My husband nodded, seemingly oblivious to the subtle shift in the atmosphere. I couldn't help but feel like something was being withheld from me, like there was a part of this plan I wasn't supposed to know. Later that night, the minister invited us for dinner. The atmosphere was thick with hidden agendas. We were seated at a round table, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, as though everyone in the room knew something I didn't. The dinner was lavish, but my mind was elsewhere. The conversation was shallow, filled with compliments and meaningless chatter. But every so often, I would catch a glance from the minister, a flicker of something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. A few weeks passed in a blur, and then came the night that would change everything. My husband, in his usual fashion, was busy preparing for the upcoming assignment. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. The minister had invited us again, this time for a private meeting. As I prepared for the occasion, I wondered if I was being lured into something much deeper than I had anticipated. When we arrived at the hotel, it was nearly midnight. The minister greeted us warmly, but there was a palpable tension in the air. We sat down, and the minister spoke, his words laced with meaning that went beyond simple gratitude. "You've proven your loyalty," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "But loyalty can be a dangerous thing." I felt a chill run down my spine. What was he implying? Before I could respond, he stood up and walked over to the door, signaling for us to leave. "I trust we'll meet again soon," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "But next time, perhaps you'll understand the real game we're playing." As we left, I couldn't help but wonder what he meant. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how deep did this web of secrets and lies go?